All right. Before I get started, anyone have any specific questions about anything? All right, as expected, silence. So I will just hop right into it. Yeah, if there's people out there making noise, please shut it down so everyone's not disturbed. Hello? Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you, Aaron. Can you hear me? Aaron, can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you just fine.
Okay. All right.
Oh. I was trying to use my headphones, but apparently they're not working, so I'll just go without it. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
All right. Yeah. All right, let's rumble. What we are going to do today is we present now. Window. Okay. Everyone see that document?
Yes.
And say yes. All right. Let me see if I can make it a little bigger so it's legible. This is we're going to kind of go over these top set of items here. The primary objective today is to move over to single file components from the JS fiddle that we were in before. Through that, I'll touch on the import export of how you inject components into parent components. So a child can be imported into a parent, and the child exports its functionality so the parent can import it. We're going to try to decompose into smaller components. So if you see the diagram here, this is the original application that we had, which was working with lists. We had an input form on top. Then we had a list of entries. We're going to take our app and we're going to break it up into a larger app component. And then inside that app component, we're going to create an input form component that will take input. We'll talk about custom events because what we want this input component to do is when you click on the button, the way the button normally emits a click event, we're going to have this button emit an add item event. So then this component will transmit an add item event, which its parent will listen to and get the data. So that'll be custom events. The list entries, this component here, its primary purpose is to just list the items. So what we'll do is we'll pass in the items as properties, similar to how you pass in parameters to functions. And then if we get that and everyone has their head wrapped around, we'll touch on computed properties. I will definitely show some Vue Tools today so we can see how we're breaking the application up into components. And then I'll leave some time for people to try to get Vue CLI set up. The idea is that we're going to use Code Sandbox today to kind of break this thing into components, and then we should be able to export the application out of Code Sandbox into Vue CLI and use the Vue CLI, which is the Vue command line interface tools to build our apps and maintain our apps. So that's where we're going to go from here. This document I will send out tonight, because what I'm going to kind of go through it today. Any questions that you guys asked or additional information that I believe needs to be added to it, I will add to this document tonight, and then I'll send it out tomorrow with the information and any additional notes that we got from today's session. Well, let me just check Slack in my email to make sure there's nobody still trying to find their way in. All right, looks like everyone who reached out to me is in. So let's switch back to the fiddle that we were using last week. Yes. No, I think we'll just live code it. We'll just kind of do it free today. So Code Sandbox. Okay, can you guys see my Code Sandbox?
Yeah, I can see it.
All right, thank you. I'm going to start out by just creating a new empty VueJS sandbox. And then we will start to work on moving over the components from the original application that we had before. So let's get this guy up. It looks like I modified it, so I'll just start from scratch. Okay, so here we are in a Vue application. We have our main configuration file where we're not going to do much. What we're going to do is we're going to start to move over the components one by one into our new project. So we'll start talking right now about the import-export. Here we have the app. We have a app view component that we are importing into this main.js file. We're importing it here because we need to provide a component as the base of the Vue application, and it's going to be app.vue. If we look at the app.vue, let me make this font a little bit bigger. Okay. If we look at the app.vue, the important thing that I want to talk about when we talk about import export. And if this isn't clear, stop me, chime, put something in the comment. This component or this module has this export default here on it, which means that all of the code that's inside of this module right here is going to be exported. Since it has default, there's no specific name associated with it. So when you get into your main.js, you just say import app. I could change this to anything I want, anything. And it will work because AppVue defaults the whole module. I mean, exports the whole module by default. If you see something like this, export. So if we just say const it's not going to let me. I'm going to have to show this inside of the Vue CLI. But what will happen when I show it inside of Vue CLI, if I specify a name here, and I'm not notice it doesn't say default, then what will happen is that when you import it, it will require you to specify what you want to import from this module. So in this example, I'd have to say my app. And notice the difference is that it has the brackets around it. As you can see, the way that Code Sandbox is set up, it doesn't have the proper plugin, so I can't show it here, but I'll show it when we switch over to Vue CLI. So I'll make a note on that to make sure I cover it when we get to Vue CLI. All right, so let's clean this back up. Okay, so we will remove the stuff we don't need from here. We don't need the image, and we don't need hello world because that's not a component that we care about. But what we do care about is we're going to use the names just as I have in the document. So we are going to need to create a component called input form. And then we will also need a component called items list. Okay. The important thing is when you're utilizing child components inside a component, you need to make sure that you add them to this component section here. Well, actually, there's two things you need to do. A, you need to make sure you import them. So I know that I'm going to need two import statements, so I'll just copy this. I know I'm going to place my, hold on, let me turn my do not disturb on. I know I'm going to place all my components in my components directory, so I can just use the same structure. So we'll say input form, items list. And then, as I said, you need to add them both down here. So input form, and then items list will be added here. This is complaining because it can't find them. So what we'll do is we're going to go into our components directory, And we are going to create these two files as placeholders for now. So first we will put our input form. And then we will create our, what did I call that guy? Items list form. I mean, items list view. Okay. And we don't need hello world anymore. So, every single file component, which is what these are, our input form is a single file component, and our items list is a single file component. They all follow the same structure of including a template, a script, and a style. Most IDEs have a so this keystroke generator that should scaffold it. This one by default has it also. So if I just say scaffold, it creates the three sections that are critical to every component: a template section, a script section, and a style section. So I can just copy the empty sections to each one of them. This is my list items. This is my list items view. So I can just to kind of test this out, H1 list items. And then then we'll go to our input form and we will just change this to input form. And as you can see, we now have our two separate components. We have an input form component and a list items component. And let's do, yeah. Let's do this to just kind of show that the components are separate. Okay, and then let's make it something a little bit darker. Why is my background color style? All right, let's try it here. Why is it not showing my? Okay, we'll change this one to something different. This is So we have our separate forms. We have our input form and an input list item, which are, here's my app view, which are child elements inside the app view. Everybody clear on that so far?
Yeah.
That was low, yeah.
What about it? Can you go back to item list? I thought it. Yeah. So when you in the script, you have to export default.
Yeah, so this is what I was talking about for. So what's happened is that since for both of these modules I'm exporting default, it allows me inside of inside of my app view here to just import them directly like this. Since they're not named, if the exports were named, you'd have to put it in brackets like this and specify the name of what you want exported from the model. From the module. Since it's a default, there's no need to specify a name, and I can put whatever name I want there. What next week, or if I get a chance when I'm in the CLI where I can have the plugins installed, I'll show you. There's a way you can construct these where you actually export them with the given name. But what you should do, and that's a good transition, is that you should actually name all of your components. So in here, I will call this INPT input. And then over here, I'll go back into my items list and I will name them. And I will, what is this? IT list. And I will kind of jump ahead for a second here to show you why you want to name them. So if
That's weird because I didn't have to name my other ones.
What do you mean?
I mean, my other project, I didn't have to.
You don't have to name them here, but what happens is that when you start to use developer tools, and this tool I'll try to get to at the end if we have time.
For like debugging and stuff?
For debugging and stuff, so. Can you guys still see this new browser window that I opened? It says transpiling modules.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure if it was just showing the tab or the whole window. So I'll add a link to the bottom of this, but in your Chrome browser, you can add Vue Developer Tools. And what it does is it shows you kind of the structure of your application. So you can see I have my root, then I have my app, and then I have my input form and my items list form. And so as your app becomes more complex, the value of being able to identify your components based on their name, which is what this is doing here, and being able to see what's going on inside the tools will also be critical. And I'll show you some more cool things that you can do with the tool as we start to build out this application. All right, so if we recall our previous example that we had from last week, we had in our input form, I'm just cutting and pasting the code from what we had last week to save some time in the typing. This should mostly be a review from what we had last time around. I took a template tag. I don't need the template tag, don't need the template tag. I don't need the tag. I don't need the div. Okay. So what I'm going to hide this since we're going to just use the larger one when we need it. So all I've done is I've taken the HTML elements from the large Vue application we had last time that were specific to the input form, and I've just put them in the template section of this component, since the purpose of this component is to render just the input form. The debugger is complaining, see down here, because it says, well, it was complaining before for the end tag, but it's complaining now. It can't read the variables that are in the form. that we used to have in the data section. So we now need to add the data section to our component. So data, actually I can just copy this from here also. So now we have all the reactive data that we needed from the component here to support our input name and our input data name and our input data zip. And then the next thing that's missing is the add item. It's looking for this add item function. So then we'll copy over the method that was specific to the input form, and we'll add that here in our script section. So all we're doing is pulling the functionality from the one monolithic component that we had before, and basically decomposing it into smaller components that can be utilized. So let's see what I got now. All right, so now I have, let me make this side a little bigger. Right. So now we have all the functionality that used to exist in the input form decomposed into a separate component right now. And if we look at the developer tools, as I was talking about before, once you click on the actual component, it gives you information about the component. Right now, the only information we really have is the data, so it lets you know what the data is that exists on that component. Are we good? Ask me some questions about kind of what we saw, if there's any questions at all.
Yeah, okay, so how come you have to create a dictionary and return? How come you don't have to use the semicolon for data? Like how come basically you have to create a function?
Why is this like it's because these components can be utilized multiple times. You need to return data as a function as opposed to data being static.
Okay, because they can be used multiple times.
Because there could be multiple instances of this.
And multiple, okay. Yeah, because I saw that in the one example. I was like, how come it's different than from what we were looking at? Okay.
And each instance of the component can have its own data, right? That can be different values at various times. So that's why it needs to be returned as a function.
Okay, so this is what we should be following from now on, I guess.
Yes, you have to do this in single file components.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
All right, so if we go back, so now we have our guy, and we can see as I'm entering, because it's reactive, as I'm entering the data, it's actually being updated in the data section. And all that's great. But I need to do something with my add item now, right?
Okay.
So the idea here is that this input form does nothing but get the input data and give it to whoever wants it when the user clicks add item, right? It's a separation of concerns. It makes it easier to test components. We know that this component just has one simple thing to do: get some data and then give it to me when I ask for it. So what we want, the same way how a button has one thing to do, which is when someone clicks on it, emit a click event and gives the user the ability to do something with that click event. What we want to do is when someone clicks add item on this form, we want to emit an add item event, and whoever's listening to that event can do whatever they want to do with the data that's being passed in the add item event. So we will come here, and we have our function add item right now that does nothing. And what we're going to do is Vue has the ability for you to create your own custom events. And we're going to create our own custom event called add item. And the way you do that is, just make this a little bigger. You use this emit functionality. I'm making up my own name for this event, add item. and the add item has a payload or an object of data that will be passed along with this event. And since what we want is we want the information that the user typed in, which exists in this input data object, we are going to pass all of these values as the payload for this emit event. So what we want to do here is we're going to do some component destructuring. Let's change this to something that's more specific. And just to be clear, that the code that I've written is the same as doing this.
And then after that, you're resetting it basically.
Yeah, that's what I'm resetting it so that because remember it's still visible, and if I don't reset it, you'll still see the same data.
Okay.
So this code down here of doing it on 2 separate lines is the same as this way. I'm destructuring this input data to extract the name and the zip, and then I'm adding it to event data. This event add item will be emitted, and it will pass on basically the name and the zip as the payload or as the body of this event. And then after I emit the event, I want to clear the form. So that's what I'm doing right here. And right now, nobody's listening to it, but I can say, Aaron, and it did not work. Oh, let me try and reload. Let's see if I get better luck this time. You can see it cleared the data. Now, the other thing that's cool about this developers tool is you can look up here and it tracks events that are emitted. So it let me know that an add item event was sent from my input form, and the data that it had was this. And it just, this event listener keeps track of all the events that are being emitted. So now my input form component has been completed. It does what it's supposed to do. It lets me enter data. It clears when I click the add item, and it emits an event with the information in it. So the next thing to do is to have somebody listen for that event. And the way that you do that is we go back to our app view. And the same way how when I create a button and I want to listen to the click event, and then I give it a function, listen to, this is what we're going to do on our input form. We're going to listen for an add item event. And then when it's called, we're going to execute a specific function. For now, so we come back to our default app. We need to add our methods section here. We're taking, for those who have the documentation and the information from the previous fiddle, I'm just copying over the add item function that we had before. So, complaining. What did I do wrong? Methods. Did I do something wrong? Okay, it's fine. So has everyone followed what I've done from adding the event listener to my input form?
Oh, okay. That's the same one that's the emit method, right? Or the
Right.
emit.
So the input form, when you click add item. Oh, sorry, let me. Yeah. The input form when you let me change it so it's clear. Handle add item clicked. And then inside my input form, I handle the add item clicked. And the handle the add item clicked, I copy the local data, and then I emit event. I emit an event called add item. So the input form emits that event. The app view, which is holding the input form, is listening for the add item event. And when it gets the add item event, it calls this function add item.
Oh, okay, okay.
It gets the data that was passed from the event as the parameter being passed into this function. And then I can take the event data that gets passed in. I get the name, I get the zip code, I get my new item, I give it a unique identifier, and then I add it to my list of elements.
Now, for items, do you have to initialize that somewhere?
Yes, and so what I'll do here is we need to add our data section. And that should connect the last of the dots. So we add some information. See the add item event get committed. And now if we go back to our app, we can see our items data has the values that got pushed into it from our add item event.
Okay.
And we can see this happen in real time if I add some new data. So new data. You can see it adds the new item pushes the new item onto the end of the array.
Oh, that's cool.
And then to just reinforce the reactive data part, what we'll do for now is we will just go into our app, and underneath our components here, we will write out our items data. So that's the array of data first. So what happens is, just to kind of step through the process again, I have a separate component that sits inside of my app component. That app component, which is called the input form. The input form allows you to enter data into it. And when you click the add item button, it emits an event that contains the data that you typed in. The app component, which sits at the top level, is listening for the event from the input form. And then when it gets this event from the input form, it takes this data and it adds it to its list of items, which is here. So looking at the code again, we have our input form, which emits an event called add item. When the event is received, it calls this function add item. Add item gets its data, which is the payload that was passed from the emit. It takes the name, it takes the zip, it creates a new item, creates unique ID for that item, and then adds the item to this list called items. Since items is a reactive data element, as items are added to it, it will automatically update in the UI.
Oh, cool.
So any questions about any of that? We're going to do it a couple of more times for the when working with the items list, but this is the meat of a lot of what we're going to cover. Okay. I'm going to assume that silence means you get it. What's next? Okay. So the next part is our list. So we want to be able to see the actual items from the list as they're being added. So we are going to follow the same approach that we did with constructing our input form. We're going to first pull over the default information that we need from the previous app. And if you look at for anyone who wants to follow along, if you look at the PDF file that was posted in the Slack channel from the last session, it has all the source code for the original JS Fiddle solution. And if you go down to the section marked list of items, yes, list of items using ID from JSON object, you'll see all the source code for the items list the items list template. That is the data that we need. Hold on a second. Okay, I'm back. So what we're going to do is we're just going to copy all of the HTML required to draw the list. And we're going to add it here, and we don't need this big title anymore in our list items. So we okay. So we have our name. So this list items, it's one job right now is to render a list of items. but we need to give it a list of items. So to give it the list of items, we need to be able to pass it parameters the same way you pass parameters into functions. And the way that you do that is through properties. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the parent component, which is this app view, which holds the list, and we need it to render items. So just to make it clear, I'm going to call this property input items, and I'm going to pass it items. And then we go into our items list view. We tell it that it has some props. And the props that it has is input, what did I call it? Input items. And we could take this data from the props directly to the template. So I could just replace items here with props, with input items. Go back to my app view, input items. And I should be good to go. So you can see now that all of the items from my list are now being rendered inside my input items. So once again, I defined a property. I gave it a name. The colon in the front tells my component that it needs to basically interpret this value. And since this is a value, it knows to look for the property called items. If I don't bind it by putting this colon here, it will treat this as a string. And then the string items will get passed in as the property, as opposed to the value of items when I bind it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
He's not a gangster or a hardened criminal. He's just a scared guy.
Okay. So I don't need to render the items down here anymore. I guess I'm getting them drawn the way that I want inside of my list here. Let me clean up some styling. I don't need this. So we're getting items added. That was pretty straightforward because at this point, this items list view component only has one purpose in life, and it's just to get a list of items and render those items. It gets passed a property that contains those values, and it processes that list of items, iterates through, and draws them all. Going back to our Vue Dev Tools, we can take a look at our list items. We can see that it has a property called input items and what the values are that are associated with it. Our input form has no properties. It just has its internal data, which is this item. And then our app component, which kind of sits at the top, holds the overall items array. We're still passing properties. We're emitting custom properties from our input form that has payload data, which is the information from the form that we want to pass along, which is stored down here. Around properties, there's some more complex things that you could do with properties. This could be passed as an object, so you can actually do type checking on what properties get passed. So it can kick back errors. I think so. I can say type. Let me see. I think I'm doing this wrong. Guess it's not working. Let's see. Props name. Data record props names the name method. On the break, I'll take a look and see exactly how to do this again. But basically, the idea is that you can specify the type of the property, and Vue will throw errors in the console to let you know that invalid data is being passed as properties, so that you can address it. Very similar to what React does when it is checking properties. Hold on a second. Ooh, yeah. I was making it harder than it is. It's props. So yeah, that should be it. And then what happens if you, like if I go back here and I remove the binding, so it just thinks it's getting a string. You see, Vue is still processing it. It created an array out of the items, and you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for each one of the letters. But you got this warning error saying it expected an array and got a string value instead. So it allows you to do type checking on your components. So I can put that back. Also, you can add multiple components. So let's just say test. Let's call this message. And then if we look at our elements again, we get our two properties. It has a string and the type associated with it. So, all right, I'm going to remove this. And just leave it looking for the array. We'll go back to our app view and put this here. All right, next. So now that we have our items in the list, the other thing that the app was doing, if you go back to the previous documentation from the first session, was we were able to select an item in the list and delete it, right? So in order to do that, one of the things that you learned in most of these component-based JavaScript frameworks is that there's this concept of kind of pushing the state up as high as you can. So what that means is that child components should not be manipulating, should not really be manipulating larger global state objects. So in this example, our list of items is like top level state data that should not be being manipulated directly at lower level components because there are higher level components that need access to the data. So what that means is that if I want to delete an item from the list that's the component that's rendering the list of items should not be deleting items from the list. It should ask its parent or someone higher up to actually delete the items from the list. And the way you do that is by emitting events. So what we want to do is down inside of our list item view, let's put our delete button back in. This, once again, I'm just copying the code from the documentation I provided you from last session. We will add our delete button in here. And we want to follow the model, the pattern that we used inside of the input form. Let's split the screen. I'm going to split it down there, but I guess I'll have to do. All right. Which was, we want to emit a specific event when the user clicks a delete item. Right. And since, just to show you another way that this could be done, we can actually emit the event directly from the click inside of here, just to shorten things. When you're inside the template, you don't need the this, so I can delete the this. I say emit. I can say delete item. What we want to send on a delete is we want to send the ID of the item that we're trying to delete. That should, I need to use single quotes because I already have double quotes on the outside here. So what this is going to do is when I click on the button, it will emit a delete item event from my items list view. And with it, it will have the ID of the item that needs to be deleted. So then now anyone who's listening for that event can get that information, delete the item from the list. Since this items list component takes the list in as a property, any changes to that property will force the list to re-render. So that's why it doesn't matter who deletes the item. At the end of the day, that reactive object is getting passed back into the list view, and so the list view will redraw itself when that changes. And to show you an example of that, I believe I can do this. If I go back to my top level app and I delete this second object, because I've changed this value is reactive and it's being passed in to items list as a property, items list will redraw itself, and that's why the item was removed from the list. And let's refresh this. I've added the delete event, so we should be able to see the delete event over here where we're tracking events. So I have my delete item event that got emitted. I have the payload, which is the ID of the item that I want to delete. See, it sent this along. And so now in the app view, where I'm listening for these events. Oh, I'm not listening yet. I need to add the listener. I can add a function that will take the ID and delete the item from the list. And that is, once again, I'm just taking this method from the code we had last session. This is the same code we had from the last session where we use filter to remove the item from the list based on the key that was passed in. The key that is passed in is the payload that comes from this delete item event. We look back here at the delete item event. We see the payload is the unique identifier that we're looking for to remove the item from the list. So the item gets clicked, delete item function is called. It gets past the key or the ID of the item to delete. And then we filter out items from the list that have the actual ID. And then the items gets updated. Since the items is being passed in as the property to my list will respond to the new data and redraw itself appropriately. So let's give it a run and see if it works. So I emitted the delete item event. The delete item event had the payload. Then my method filtered out the item. And then we can just take a deeper look at it like this. Let's go into our app view. We will set a breakpoint in here. I will click my delete. Oh, sorry. Let me refresh this. Okay. So since I set the breakpoint, it drops into my code. Makes this a little bit bigger for everyone. We're now in my method, my delete item method, because we received our. It's not rendering that event yet because we stopped. I have my value that I need. I have all my list of items here. Right now, it just has one object in it. But that one object has the ID that we need. We filtered through each item, and then we remove them from the list. And then the list is empty. I'm going to pause. Any questions? Is anything that I went over that I should go over again a little bit slower? Thinking. I'm going to take a little break since I've been talking for almost an hour now. So let's take a bio break and a rest till about 5 to 7 I'm going to send over. I was trying to send over before, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to send over the PDF of what I've covered so far right now in Slack, because there's no way to do it inside of the Meet. So you can take a look at the documentation, and if you if you have any questions about it, let me know. I'll also I will send. Please don't change any. Actually, you'll just be able to fork it. So here's the source code so far. If you want to look at it on your own in Code Sandbox. And then this is the draft of today's materials. So let's try to, I'll get started again around 6:55. But take a look at the documentation, take a look at the source code from the Code Sandbox link that I provided you. And if you have any questions, we can go over some questions when we reconnect. Thanks. All right, I'm back. So did anyone have any questions about the documentation that was sent over, or anything that you saw in the source? I got some music going. Thank you. Should have had some hold music on during the break. My apologies. I have to look more. Yes. No questions. Is that me? You said yes. That was me that said yes. Okay. So what do I want to cover next? Hold on. I only got as far as delete my documentation. So let's do some. Let's add to my list. Let's talk. Well, let's revisit the concept of scoped styling. So by default, any style that you put here at your top level app view will be available throughout your whole Vue component. So child components have access to them also. But if I want something that's just for this view, so input form, for example, so let's do this. Let's say buttons in my, oh, not that, buttons. All right. So you see now, even though I added it inside of my input form, I said, but all buttons, any object of type button has a font size of 20. See, it's inside my input form, but my list item is also, that also has buttons, is getting that style. So the way that you manage that is through the idea of using scoped style. So all you do is on your style here, you just put scoped. Make sure I say this, spell this right. Yes. And then these styles only live, exist, work, and function inside of this specific form. So if I go back here, my style's been updated. You can see my button in this form still keeps the smaller size. So that's the way to manage some styles. And once again, to focus on the single file component concept, where everything that you need to manage, manipulate, and work with the component is stored inside of that component. Any questions on that? Give me a second to write that down. And then let's put this back. We'll just remove this completely. Another interesting thing that you can do inside of your components is there's the concept of computed properties. Sorry. So basically, these are properties that are derived from activities that take place within your component or components that are related to it. So for example, we have a list here, right? And our list has items in it. And as I add items to it, the count changes. This is a really bad kind of manufactured example just to show how computed properties work. So I can come up to my app view and I can add up here computed, and you're gonna have to bear with me to make sure I get the get how this is done properly, because I always mess this up. So the size, computed. This size, sorry. Just join, okay. Oh, sorry, it was right before. Let's sign. So what happens is that on the render, if your computed function depends on a property that is reactive, i.e. something inside of data here, it will recalculate this value. So some folks say, well, why don't I just do items.length, right? Why don't I just do this? The reason why you don't just do this is that these values here are cached. Meaning that if I put this in my view, up here inside my template, every single time the template's redrawn, it will recalculate this value. It's not that big a deal here because this is just the count of an array, but your computed value could be something way more complex, right? And you only want it to get recomputed if some of the properties it depends upon changes. That's what computed does for you. It's intelligent enough to know what properties this result depends on, and it will only recalculate this value if those properties change. Otherwise, it just returns the cached value. So it gives you a performance increase when you're rendering objects. Does that make sense? Or I need to explain it another way.
So that computed, it's kind of like a life cycle thing, kind of, or
No, it's more it's basically a way to help speed up rendering of your objects and for you to focus on your application should be reactive. It should redraw itself based on changes in state or based on changes in objects, right?
Okay.
And what computed does is it allows you to derive values from those changes.
Okay.
And it does it in a way that it's caching values. So it's only doing calculations based on changes to reactive values. So the way you should look at it is that if you ever have some function inside of your render code appear on your template, that's performing a calculation based on some data that you have that's reactive, it probably should be sitting inside it. It should be a computed function and not one of the down here. Right? Let's do just to kind of beat the point home. Let's try and live code something else here on the fly. Let's try and do this. So we can see if this works. Okay. So we've added a, just to confirm. All right, so we're keeping track of whether this item's checked or not checked, right? So if I wanted to keep track of which items are checked and which items weren't checked, right? That would be an example of something that I would want to compute based on changes to the data. I wouldn't want to have to, and I only would want to update that if the data actually changed, right? So Where am I? Where am I? And then let's see. I have an error. Item length filter is not a. Oh. Damn. My apologies. Oh, okay. I thought I didn't turn the recording back on. All right. Let's check. I don't want an array. I want the length of my array, right? My list count is going up. And and the other computed function is basically only being recalculated or re-rendered when these items change. So you're kind of getting the hang of when you would want to use a computed function versus when you're storing the data. Is this making sense?
Makes sense.
Yeah. Let me go back to the top of my list. All right, so we covered Decompose, we covered custom events, we covered working with properties, computed properties. I dabbled in the Vue Tools a bit already. So what can I cover that's not going to be too much in the next 30 minutes or so? Let me see. We got our form. We have our list view. We can decompose one more time. So How did it? Let's see what we got. Yeah, there we go. What I did once again was, decompose our objects and our components even more. So in our list, we used to also render the actual entry here inside of this list element. And it seems like it was not a big deal that we were rendering it there. But the thing to remember that's important is that anytime a reactive data element changes, the templates that are impacted by it will re-render, will draw again. And the whole idea of what you're trying to do is minimize screen redraws because it creates flicker and it creates a bad user experience, right? So in the previous example, when I had all the code to render the item inside my items list view, if I had a list of 300 items and I changed one item, the whole list would be redrawn. And the whole list would be redrawn because the drawing of the list is inside of this one template. By decomposing the items into separate elements, if there's 300 items in my list and I change the 299th item, it will only redraw the 299th item because it's in a separate component. If I toggle that true false button inside this item entry, it's only going to redraw this item entry. It will not redraw anything else because it's been decomposed into a separate component. So that is another benefit that you get of breaking things into smaller components, is a positive impact on your amount of time that it takes to render an item. Is this making sense?
So yeah, the item entry is linked to the item.
Yeah, so we pass it in just like we did with the list. So with the list, we go back to the top. On the list, we passed in all the items into the list item. And then what we do inside the list item, we pass off the drawing of the item to a new component called item entry, where if we needed to make changes to how it's rendered, we need to have styles that are specific to each entry, all of that stuff would be contained inside of this component and managed by this component. Furthermore, since this component's responsible for re-rendering, it will only render if the specific item that it is supposed to render has been modified. So like I said, if this item is not the 299th item and the 299th item is the one that I changed, then it will not be redrawn. It will be the DOM, the virtual DOM will basically skip right over it. It won't attempt to update it, and it will only update the element that's changed. As opposed to if I was drawing everything right here, then it would be different. It would redraw everything. You can't really see the flicker or any of that on the small list because the list is small. Also, we're not really doing a lot of complex rendering. But imagine if this item entry had a whole bunch of text, it had some images, it had to do a bunch of other things to figure out how to draw itself. All that would be happening every single time, even though none of it changed. That is what we're attempting to avoid here. Hold on, I'm taking some notes. Okay. And then the last thing that I'm going to do for today is to try on the fly, since I thought I'd get some more questions today, so I'm out of material for today. I'm going to try to, on the fly, export this thing into Vue CLI. So Vue CLI is basically how you can create, manage the development lifecycle of Vue applications, all from the command line. I always keep saying that, but I forget that they now have a graphical interface that sits on top of it. So you can use that if you're not very comfortable with the command line. For anybody who's done React development and is familiar with Create React App, that a lot of people use now to spin it up, Vue CLI is the equivalent for Vue. So it's following along with the commands are pretty straightforward. I've already done an npm install of Vue CLI. I already have it set up on my computer. In Code Sandbox, theoretically, these projects are set up to work in Vue CLI once exported. So if you see this little download button here, where it says export to zip, you can click this and it will download a zip file that, show and finder. Hold on, you guys can't see this screen, so let me get another screen set up. Hold on, let me share my new screen with you. Okay. So I created a separate directory. I believe I have, let's see, find a window. I have this zip file that was downloaded, show on the Finder. Let's get rid of this other window so you can see it anyway. And so what I've done is I've taken that zip file and I've exported it here. So let me do this. All right, let's do this way. And as I mentioned last time, I use Vue CLI. I mean, I use Visual Studio Code as that's my IDE that I debug in. So you'll see here that we have. Can you? Hopefully, everyone can see this window. Yes. Someone give me a yes.
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 So you can see we have the exact same files from Code Sandbox. I've exported that project, and let me open up a terminal window inside of here. With so now I'm in this project directory. I believe that at this point, all I need to do is an npm install. This was the video. This would be the part where I would cut it and pause, but we got to just wait for all the stuff to download. Also, it only is this long the first time, so you don't have to go through this all the time. You'll take this pain that when you first create a project. This is one of the reasons why I use Code Sandbox a lot for when I'm first spinning up projects to just kind of avoid all of this build. And Please let this not throw build error here. Okay. So it should have now downloaded everything. Now let's see if this thing runs. And I think npm run serve. And then it, I'm going to have to just show my whole screen because I keep flopping in and out of stuff. So. All right, you should now be able to see the craziness of my whole screen. Let's hop over to get a browser up. Let's bring a nice browser window over here for everyone. And then my app should be running at this address. And here's my app running. And what the Vue CLI does is it kind of gives you similar functionality that you had in the code Sandbox, where it's doing a live reload of changes. So we can go into this, my input form, and I'm tired of looking at this huge font here. We could change this to like 3. And it's gonna detect the change on the fly, recompile, and update it. But now we have our program running in Vue CLI. And you just continue to add components, make changes here as you would normally. It will throw errors for you when you do things bad. So let's see. So I take this out. Right. We're gonna get our error rendered over here, but then also what we'll get in the terminal below, it'll point us to kind of where it's seeing the problems and actually a line number to make it easier for you to edit. And you should be able to just fix the error. And since it's watching, it detects the change, it automatically recompile, and then your app is up and running again. What I was using before, so if I believe I added the link to the documentation, but I'll check again before I send the final version, which is the Vue Dev Tools. I don't know how many. So just to make it clear, there's not a version of the Dev Tools that runs on Safari. So your choices are either as a Chrome extension, a Firefox add-in, or you can download it as an Electron app that can run. But that was, as I said, I have it installed as a component. So when I go into Vue Developer Tools, this Vue is the Vue Dev components. So I have access to them. This what you're seeing on my screen is how I work when I work on projects. I'm actually working on a Vue project right now for a client, and this is how I run. I have my IDE open in one window. I have my browser open with it running on the server. I have my Vue Dev Tools open so that I can see what's kind of going on inside of my application, and I just start to work through the process.
How did you start the application up again? I'm sorry, I missed.
So the command I used, and just if you're ever confused, if you look inside of the package JSON, I did a Vue run serve.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay.
So that's what starts the server. The build is if when you're all done and you want to kind of package the thing up to deploy on some hosting service,
Yeah.
you do a build on it. And what the build does, you'll see. The build will it will package everything up. It'll minify it and do all the amazing things that most bundling services do for you, and give you a so it chunked everything up properly so that you can do lazy loading stuff, which we'll go over later. And then it creates a dist directory that has all the information that you'd want to deploy. So if you had some command line to deploy, you would deploy this dist directory to your server, and then it's ready to run.
All right. So, because I mean, I ran. I thought so if you wanted to, you can run basically npm run the Vue CLI service serve.
Yes, but that's what the scripts are here for, to kind of simplify it for you.
Okay. So
you can just run npm run serve directly.
Yeah. Okay. I got it. Okay. Because I was doing. I just making sure.
Then I'm trying to remember this other. The Vue CLI for the GUI, because I always forget it, but I know some people like that. So Vue Oh yeah, I think that's it. So let's see if this works. So basically what this does is it allows you to package up and run start, restop, look at the output, and do a bunch of, this looks like it loaded up another project. But all the things that you could do from the command line, they've created this nice user interface and dashboard for you to be able to look at to manipulate your projects through the Vue CLI. And you get that just by running Vue UI. And like I said, I'd expected some more questions, so that's about it that I have for content for today. I will add the additional stuff that I covered to the bottom of that PDF file that I sent at the break, and I'll send the final version of that over. I will, since I already have this code downloaded, I will zip this code up and attach it so that you guys don't have to try to track down the code Sandbox where it was. So we'll download this code and I will add it to the Slack channel.
So, but sorry, you said you could run Vue UI if you're inside of the disk?
No, you can run Vue UI from inside of. Actually, you can run Vue UI from any place, and then what happens is you can tell it where your projects are, and it will keep track of all of your Vue projects that you have on your computer. And so through the UI, you can find them all, start them, stop them, do whatever you want.
Okay.
I just happen to run it from the existing project directory.
Okay. Oh, cool.
So that is the source code of session 3. I will update this Vue document that we had. Once this video is downloaded, I will kind of cut out the 30, 40 minutes of silence and the other stuff, edit it, and I will send out a link to that. I won't upload that to Slack. I'll send out a link to that where anyone can get it and kind of go through it if you have any questions about the video. Also, I want to say I posted the calendar. I always say this wrong. I posted the Calendly for time that I was available for office hours. I think only one person took advantage of that. I'll try it again next time and see if anyone has any questions. Please use it. Otherwise, I'll just start to reduce the amount of hours I make myself available. So I'll focus on those hours for something else. I know it's kind of hard to kind of follow along and answer questions online. My apologies. Unfortunately, this is the situation we're in. That's why I'm offering up the office hours for one-on-one time to kind of talk about whatever you want. I can go over all this stuff again one-on-one with you. That's the whole objective of having the office hours. Because if we were in person, this is what I'd be doing on the breaks. I usually would go around and help people through problems that they have. So please take advantage of the office hours. Please send me emails or hit me up on Slack in a direct message if you're confused about something, and I'll go through it. Also, please come to the office hours with kind of your own ideas. I'm not going to call anyone out, but like the person who I spoke with today, we spoke completely about a separate project that they're trying to work on and trying to understand how they can do it in Vue. And so, I mean, that's the time to kind of get your one-on-one questions answered about stuff that you might be afraid of asking or you think might be taking us off track in the course. I think I will repost the hours again, so it's down here at the bottom. I have some time. I know I still have some hours set aside for tomorrow, and I will also set some hours aside on Monday. So thank you everyone for attending. I know that we're all going through some challenging times, so I appreciate the effort. And enjoy your evening. I will be around at least for another 10 or 15 minutes if somebody... Oh no, link is broken. No, it just worked. No times in March. Oh, all right. I will reset that link with available times as soon as we get off this call, so that if anyone wants to sign up while it's still in your top of mind, it's available. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Yes, and like I said, review the notes. You have the notes from the second section and notes from the third section. Read through them. If there's anything that's not clear, that's what the office hours. It's a good time to just ping me and we can go through some of that stuff. I can walk through the code with you one-on-one. I strongly encourage you to try to get some of this running on your own computer, and we can do a screen share and kind of step through it also. So everyone stay safe, wash your hands, and stay away from people coughing, and enjoy your evening.
Have a good day.
Yep.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Hey, Aaron, really quick. I'll reach out to you on LinkedIn because Firefox is not liking that link. So.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. I got your message. I will see you on LinkedIn.